Hello, everyone, and welcome in to the Golden Sombrero Show. It has been a long time since we went live, probably since like November at this point, and the offseason was slow. It's starting to pick itself up. Some teams have made it very interesting, including my San Diego Padres, and some teams have just done nothing. But you know what? The hot stove, it's cooking. Boys, Cole, Ryan, how you guys doing today? I'm excited to talk baseball again with you guys.
Doing good, man. Doing good.
I'm excited to finally have a show with y'all. It's been a long time. It's been a real long time.
It has.
Yeah, one thing still hasn't changed since we went live last. Cole still has his flow. He looks like that pitcher. He still has that high school baseball player still left in him. It looks good, buddy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So Ryan obviously has his terrible hair, but what else is new?
I wear hats all the time. How would you know?
I see stuff.
That's the first true sign that you
Right.
have good hair.
Right.
I just got a really short haircut, and I was like, nope, not doing it.
Anyways, I could bore you guys and make you guys talk about the Padres to begin the show, but I don't want to do that to you guys. So let's talk about the White Sox because they've also been a key player this offseason. They signed Liam Hendricks to a 3-year deal worth $54 million with a fourth year option. And whether or not that gets picked up, he's going to get that guaranteed $54 million. Anyways, very interesting contract. And I also don't believe we talked about the Lance Lynn trade. They acquired him straight up for Dane Dunning, 5 years of Dane Dunning for the Texas Rangers. So, guys, do you think the White Sox are the favorite in the American League, or are they just still the favorites in the American League Central and a possible World Series contender? Cole, we'll go to you.
It's tough because I think a lot of it is going to come down to I definitely think they're the favorites in the Central. I don't think anyone can argue that. But as far as a World Series contender or contender in the AL, I do think they are, but I don't want to put them as like a lock for anything yet. I still think I'm still curious to see how they actually play under La Russa. I still am not sold on him. And I don't care how good of a roster you have. If you have a manager like that who's sort of old school in his methods, I don't see that really. I see how that could really hinder them in a lot of big ways. But I mean, no doubt, I think the White Sox are definitely up there. I think you have to put them in that conversation for sure. After these big moves, they're not messing around. Lynn's a huge add to that staff for the next year or two, I think. Even if they give up Dane Dunning, who is probably going to end up being a pretty solid starting pitcher in this league, I still think the return with Lynn is gonna benefit them over the next year or two. And for a team that's in a win now mode, that's a good move to make. And then Hendricks obviously is one of, if not the best back end reliever in baseball. So I mean that immediately is going to help your bullpen in huge ways. And then obviously their offense is what it is. So I think that they're in a really good spot, but I'm going to be curious to see how they play under La Russa. That's going to be a deciding factor for me.
Yeah, I agree with Cole. They're the favorite in the AL Central, as they should be. And as it comes towards being a World Series contender, it goes for how La Russa does. Does La Russa still have it in him? And what kind of manager is he going to be? Is he going to stick to his ways, or is he going to adapt like baseball has been adapting ever since he really retired? So they're definitely the favorites of the Central. They're the best team in the Central looking on paper, but it comes down to how far La Russa can get them. Again, do I think that they'll be a team that's contending for the World Series? Yes. And I think that their main competition in the AL is the Yankees after getting DJ LeMahieu back. It depends how healthy they are. So there's a lot of factors, but the White Sox are in a very favorable position to where they could make a run for the World Series.
I really like their chances. I do. I mean, you look at just about every single team in the American League, they got worse this offseason. The Yankees, they lost J.A. Happ, James Paxton, and Masahiro Tanaka to free agency. Now, Tanaka and Paxton are still available, so they could bring them back. Fortunately for them, they did add Corey Kluber, and they did re-sign DJ LeMahieu, like you mentioned. You have the Rays. They lost Snell. They lost Charlie Morton to free agency. So their pitching staff has already taken a pretty big hit, even though the Rays seem to believe that Luis Patino is going to be able to make their rotation and start for them this upcoming year. So he could obviously provide some nice, solid innings. Then you look at the Indians. They obviously, they traded Carrasco, they traded Lindor. I mean, that's huge right there. And they still have a very good starting rotation, still one of the best in the league, but it's already hurt right there. Twins lost Nelson Cruz. He was their best hitter by a long shot last year after their offense from 2019 basically fell apart, except for him. And then you look out west, the A's, they lost Hendricks. Shortstop Marcus Simeon's still a free agent. Matt Chapman's going to be missing some time with an injury. Then you also look at Houston. Justin Verlander is going to be missing the majority of the season. And then you also have George Springer departing for the Toronto Blue Jays, who we'll talk about in a little bit. So it seems like just about everyone in the American League has gotten worse, and then the White Sox have gotten better. So I really like their chances. They, to me, have one of the most complete teams in the American League because you look at some of the teams, and they're either pitching heavy or they're lineup heavy, like the Yankees. But to me, when I look at the White Sox, I think they're more balanced than other teams because they have that really good lineup with Luis Robert, Tim Anderson, Yasmani Grandal, Jose Abreu, and a bunch of other guys. They also have a pretty solid starting rotation now. They got Lance Lynn, Michael Kopech should be coming back. Lucas Giolito had a fantastic year. Dallas Keuchel was unbelievable last year. I don't think he's going to replicate that 1.9 ERA season, but he could certainly put together another really good year for them. So I really like the White Sox chances. They certainly need to add to their bullpen a bit, but I think the White Sox are in a good spot to possibly be the favorite to come out of the American League. We'll all agree on this. The National League has a much better chance of having a team that's going to raise the World Series trophy come October because of right now, I'd say there's 4 teams that are certainly championship caliber, but the White Sox could certainly put up a good fight. And, last year they exploded onto the scene, and this year I think they're going to really assert their presence. So we just mentioned the Blue Jays and the Yankees, so let's talk about the American League East. The Yankees, they lost a couple of pitchers, like I just mentioned. They were able to re-sign DJ LeMahieu, who has been their one really consistent bat in that lineup. And then they added Corey Kluber, who doesn't have a lot of innings under his belt since the 2019 season. But we all know who he was before that. Multiple times Cy Young Award winner. A couple of other times in the top 5 of Cy Young Award voting. Former Padre, so it stings to see that. But he's been an absolutely incredible pitcher, and the Yankees are hoping to revitalize something from him. So, Ryan, I'm going to start with you this time. How do you view the Yankees this year? Because I think they're a really interesting team because obviously their ceiling is the best team in baseball, but at the same time, they didn't even win their division last year despite having almost the same lineup.
Honestly, what you have to think about with the Yankees is health. That's what's been for the past few years is can that team stay healthy? Can Stanton stay in the lineup? Can Judge stay in the lineup? And I think that this team has it all that they need lineup-wise. They don't have to do anything else. They honestly got a steal in bringing back LeMahieu for that cheap. So they got their guy in LeMahieu, their most consistent hitter. They've got Voit, who's hitting the top off the ball. They've also got Torres. They've got Gio Urshela. They've got everyone that they need to make a run. But they've got to stay healthy. And what they need to do now is they need to somehow find a way to get Masahiro Tanaka back, and they got to address the bullpen. Those are their 2 things they have to switch to now. Because Tanaka could be leaving the United States and going to play in Japan. But if I'm the Yankees, you got to get him back. I think he is a big piece that I think will boost that rotation to be one of the better rotations in the league. So I think they need to add him. And then the emphasis has to be on the bullpen. They need to add some guys to the bullpen because their bullpen has been bad, like real bad. So they got to get some guys there. And then they could be the favorites in the AL easily if they just add a couple more pieces.
I'm sort of on the same page. I like the Kluber signing mainly because it's low risk. It's a 1-year deal. I mean, he's at that age where he's just not who he used to be. And I mean, I'm going to be honest. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets hurt pretty early on and he misses like the whole year. I'm just not really sold on it. The guy hasn't really been completely healthy in a while, it feels like. But if they can get as much as possible out of him and get some solid innings, and he can do at least a formidable job in whatever spot he pitches in, I think that'll definitely help. But I'm surprised that the Yankees haven't done more than they have. They definitely, I think we're in the market for adding a little bit more to their bullpen because they lost a few guys. I'm pretty sure it was Kahnle and Britton are gone. Those are two pretty big pieces in their pen, and they lost out on a few guys. Obviously,
Britton's still a Yankee, but yeah, Kahnle's a Dodger.
Yeah, Kahnle's gone. That's a huge loss for them, I think. But they just haven't done much for me to say. I mean, they're still going to compete. They're still going to be good, but I honestly would probably put the White Sox ahead of them at this rate as far as contenders are concerned. Obviously, LeMahieu is huge. It's good that they got him back. Like you said, Ryan, they got him for cheap. I mean, there must have been some kind of compromise there where he wanted to be a Yankee. He wanted to stay. So good for him for being able to make that compromise. But yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see because there's still Tanaka who's out there. All this like faux pas information about them getting a Luis Castillo is kind of funny over the past week. That's just not going to happen. I would see them actually maybe trying to get Sonny Gray back because I know they're trying to trade him potentially, and that might help them a little bit. But I don't know. I feel weird about the Yankees because obviously they're still going to compete, but I just don't think they're in the best spot right now. I think they're actually worse than they were last year. So yeah.
I definitely think they are worse than last year. I mean, like I mentioned, they lost 3 starting pitchers from their rotation, and they added a guy who only pitched 1 inning last year because he was injured. That's just not a good sign. I still think they're the best team in that division right now. I think it's a very close gap between them and the Toronto Blue Jays, who, like I said, we'll talk about in a little bit. But I just don't know where the Yankees are going to get pitching innings from. Because, obviously they have Garrett Cole, who's a top 5 starting pitcher in baseball. He's incredible. The question mark isn't about him, but it's about the other guys. Luis Severino, he's going to be coming off Tommy John surgery in 2018. Is Domingo Germán going to be able to play because of his domestic abuse situation? Jordan Montgomery doesn't exactly have the best track record. And they're going to be going with a bunch of other young guys, Michael King, Deivi Garcia, and Clark Schmidt. So I just don't know what that rotation is going to look like. Like I said, really high ceiling for the Yankees. We know how good that lineup can be, and the pitching seems to have some promise. But for a team like the Yankees, who have such a good lineup and can basically afford anyone they want to, for them to have such a big question mark in their rotation, and their bullpen wasn't as good last year as a lot of people realize, they're in a tough spot. And they could certainly win the AL, but they could also lose the division and possibly miss the playoffs in my eyes. So let's talk about the Toronto Blue Jays because they've had an interesting offseason. They were in on just about every single big name, and they missed out on just about every single one. And then earlier this week, they signed my former closer, Kirby Yates, on a 1-year, $5.5 million deal with some incentives to certainly improve that bullpen. And then, of course, they added George Springer on the 6-year, $150 million deal to really shore up that lineup. And then it seemed like they were going to sign Michael Brantley on a 2-year deal, but then all of a sudden all the reporters who reported it started to back out and say, whoa, actually, the false reporting, this deal isn't done. And then, of course, Brantley went back to Houston. So what do you guys make of the Toronto Blue Jays? Because obviously they made the playoffs last year in the expanded playoffs. They were over 500, but the pitching staff certainly isn't a strength at all for that team. They're basically a Walmart version of the Yankees in my eyes. Cole, what do you think?
Yeah, I see it as the exact same way. I mean, like you said, sort of about the White Sox. I mean, while a lot of teams got worse, really only the White Sox got better. I will say I think Toronto is one of those teams that is definitely got slightly better, and the offseason isn't over yet. So obviously there's still a few big names out there that they could go and get to help shore things up a little bit more. But yeah, I feel the same way. I think Springer's I think it's great. They definitely solidify the offense a little more. But they're missing the one big thing that has been kind of a glaring issue, which is the pitching. Again, there's still a few big names out there that they're apparently in on. So I mean, I'm not ruling them out by any means. I mean, if they get Trevor Bauer by some amazing stretch here, I don't think they will, but if they do, that definitely helps them out in a huge way. If they can add maybe Brad Hand to the back end of their pen too. I mean, I don't know if they'll do that because that is another closer, and they do have Yates already. But if they add some more depth into the bullpen, I mean, I definitely think that now you have to start including them in this conversation a little bit more. But yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, at the moment, I mean, the pitching is still a glaring issue because you're not going to get by with just Ryu, and most of the talent in their rotation is like younger guys like Nate Pearson, and I just don't think he's quite there, to be like that really solid like number 2 or number 3 yet in the big leagues. But I mean, give him a couple years until I think he'll be fine. But again, I just think that's what they need to address before you can really start saying, okay, this team's legit.
Yeah, I agree. I think that also losing out on Brantley, I think it's going to have some effects because they need to get that DH bat. And who can they go to now? They don't really have anyone because they're adamant about having Guerrero play in the field, play him at third or first. So they're going to have him play in the field. They need to get a bat who can be a DH or even shift some other things around throughout the outfield. And I think Michael Brantley would have been perfect for that, but they missed out on him, which is big for the Astros. But the Jays need to go out and get a hitter and get one more bat, and then the offense is set, but they got to focus on pitching. And I think a guy that they should bring back is Taijuan Walker. 26 innings for them last year, had a 1.37 ERA. He was great for them. And if you're looking at that entire rotation, they had 2 of their guys who had ERAs above 6, in Tanner Roark and Chase Anderson. So there's a lot of issues with their pitching staff, but there are ways to fix that. There are ways to bring in different guys. I think Nate Pearson is going to take a big step this year as well because I think they're going to need him to. So they've got the offense. They just need to get the pitching. And I think that's the same way with the Yankees, is that both teams need to focus on their pitching now.
Yeah, and if anyone who's listening to this doesn't know who Nate Pearson is, I highly suggest you go and just watch some clips of him on YouTube. Dude's a really fun pitcher. He can throw 100, and he's got 3 off-speed pitches to go along with it. He's a lot of fun, and I really hope that he pans out like a lot of people think he will, because that would be huge for the Toronto Blue Jays. But yeah, I think they're a little bit behind the Yankees still. Like you guys mentioned, that pitching staff, I talked about the concerns I have the Yankees pitching staff. I mean, same thing goes for this pitching staff. And Ryan, I agree. I do think they're going to bring back Taijuan Walker. He has had some injury histories. Cole, of course, would know, given that Walker was a Diamondback, didn't exactly pitch a ton. And then Walker, of course, didn't pitch a lot in the 2020 season, which, of course, was a very short season for everyone. So I don't think he's going to draw too much interest on the market, especially for a huge price. And the Blue Jays obviously need to add 1, maybe 2 more arms to really be that contender. But I think this team can certainly make the playoffs, especially as a wildcard team behind the Yankees. And they're in a really good spot. I mean, that entire team is really young. And everyone points to Biggio, Guerrero, and Bichette. But they also have a couple of really solid players outside of that. I mean, they have Gurriel, they have Teoscar Hernandez, who won a Silver Slugger last year. Rowdy Tellez was a great bat for them over at first base. And Danny Jansen is a great catcher behind the plate to go along with who's supposed to be a really good hitting catching prospect in Alejandro Kirk. So the lineup there is loaded along with Randall Grichuk. Their defense in the outfield still is a concern, but I think that's a team with a ton of potential, and I'm excited to see them play. So what do you guys make of the American League West? Because, once again, another division that just is really hard to read because, like I already mentioned, the A's, they lost Hendricks and Simeon. The Astros, they basically don't have Verlander all year. And they lost George Springer. They did bring back Brantley, so that was good for them. And the Angels are in kind of a weird spot, and the Rangers suck. and the Mariners are still a year or two out. So what do you guys make of that division? Because I think there's a couple of teams that could definitely win the division, and the Mariners could definitely surprise some people if the talent does pan out. So Ryan, what do you think of the American League West?
Honestly, I don't know what to think because once again, the Angels are not going and getting pitching, which is what they need to do. They have the lineup, they have the talent to where if they get some pitching, they can make the playoffs. And that's what's frustrating with them because they, year after year, do not address pitching. So that's my thing with them. The A's, I don't expect much from them this year. I think they're going to do their little rebuild thing where they're out for a year or two, get their prospects ready and get going again. So right now I think the division is the Astros because I think getting Brantley back shows that they're just not withering away. I think that they still have a ton of talent. They got Bregman, they've got Correa, they've got Brantley, they've got Altuve, they've got Gurriel. They've got a lot of talent on the offensive side, which I think helps them. And they've got Zach Greinke, who's coming off a solid year, and Lance McCullers. So those two can sort of get that rotation through, along with young guys like Framber Valdez and Christian Javier. So they've got a lot of talent, but the key is if you're the A's, if you want to stay in it, you have to get Marcus Semien back. And I think that's going to be very tough because teams are in on him. So all they got to do is get Marcus Semien back, and they have a chance. Liam Hendricks is a big loss, but that bullpen overall is not bad. It's a very good bullpen. So they could make do despite having that big loss. But right now, that division is the Astros in my eyes.
Yeah, I see it kind of the same way. But I mean, if this division's ever been more up in the air like it normally is, it's now. I feel like, and honestly, the way I see it, because like you guys said with like the Angels and them having not addressed the pitching over the past couple of years, they did get a new GM, Perry Manson, I think his name is, or I don't know his last name. I don't know how to pronounce it, but whatever. He said he's very adamant on trying to change that, and I know they are one of the bigger teams in on Trevor Bauer, and they did sign Jose Quintana. And while that's not like a huge sign, you know, they're making these smaller moves that I've kind of kept up with over the offseason. They got I think it was Rafael Iglesias from the Reds. That's a big get for the back end of their bullpen. That's huge. That's going to really help. But yeah, I think honestly, if the Angels made a couple more moves, I mean, there's still a lot of offseason left, and there's still a lot of really good players to get, obviously. If they made a couple more big moves, I honestly would see them as a huge contender to win that division. But as of right now, I agree. Like, I think Houston's just the top in that division right now, just based on what they still have remaining. And bringing Brantley back definitely helps. Like you guys said, they also are getting Yordan Alvarez back healthy next year, which is going to be huge for them. So that's definitely going to help because that's a huge young bat that they need that they were missing. But yeah, aside from that, I think that I think it's really going to depend on, you know, who's able to keep the most. I think the A's honestly will find a way to still somehow compete with what they have left. They always seemingly do that. Even if they don't bring back Marcus Semien, I could see them bringing in like, you know, Didi Gregorius or even, you know, one of those guys on like a cheap 1-year deal, and, you know, they just kind of figure it out like they normally do. But it'll be tough for them, I think, this year with Chapman being out for the distant future. But yeah, as of right now, I think just by default, you have to consider the Astros as like the top dog in the division.
Yeah, like you guys mentioned, this is a really tough division to read. The A's are still going to have a really good pitching staff. You know, Hendricks leaving, of course, hurts, but the starting rotation is still really, really good. And that's obviously going to keep you in games because I think one of the biggest changes or one of the biggest, you know, needs going from the 60 games to 162 games is you're going to want starting pitching to, you know, give you innings and not tax the bullpen as much, and that's certainly something that the A's are better at than a lot of these other teams. But a team that I'm really interested in is the Angels because I think they could take a very big jump from last year. They ended September really well. They were starting to play well, And I think that they can continue that success over because Jared Walsh, he came up as a rookie for them and he tore it up in the month of September. He had 293 with a 646 slugging percentage. So that'll play for sure. He needs to walk a little bit more, but I think he can certainly improve off of that. They also acquired Jose Iglesias along with Raisel Iglesias from the Orioles. He had his best hitting year of his career, and Angelton Simmons is now gone. And I don't want to disrespect Angelton Simmons because obviously he's a fantastic fielder at shortstop, but so was Iglesias. And Iglesias had a much better hitting season than Simmons did. So I certainly think that Iglesias can help out in that aspect as well. Fletch God can move over to second base, and all of a sudden that's a formidable infield there with Walsh at first, Fletcher at second, Iglesias at short, and then Anthony Rendon at third. Rendon missed the first week of the season. After that, he came back and, of course, was spectacular. I would honestly expect him to have a little bit better of a season next year once they'll get to settle in Southern California and not have to worry about the pandemic as much. Obviously, it's still out there. And then the outfield. I mean, Mike Trout, he's Mike Trout. We don't need to say anything else about him. And then Joe Adell, he obviously didn't do too well, but he's going to have now a full spring to get under his belt without having the time off. And everyone knows that he has just the most upside of like almost any prospect in baseball. So I think there's a lot to like about this Angels team. The pitching staff's obviously concerned, but they did sign Jose Quintana this past week, and he had been a fairly consistent pitcher before being injured in 2020, but that's the 2020 season. So how he responds from that will be certainly something to look at in terms of the Angels. And if they sign Trevor Bauer, I'll mark them as my favorite to win the American League West because it's wide open. So let's move over to the NL. I mean, let's talk about the Padres. I'm going to make you guys talk about them. Padres acquired Blake Snell, Yu Darvish, Joe Musgrove, and Ha-Sung Kim this offseason. It's been quite the offseason. The Padres have all of a sudden entered as the second favorite in the National League and the third best favorite in all baseball to win the World Series. I couldn't be more excited. So, Cole, as a fellow team in the NL West, you being a Diamondbacks fan, what do you make of the Padres offseason, and what do you make of them for next year?
Well, it's funny because you say they've had a good offseason and it's not even over yet, so I wouldn't even put a label on it because they could have a great offseason. I mean, honestly, they already have had a great offseason, but it's just crazy because, I mean, this is just A.J. Preller at his finest. I guess as a fan of a team in the division, I mean, if it's anybody but the Dodgers, it's all good, and that's what I'm happy about. But I was just, I don't know. It's hard not to be a baseball fan, and not like the Padres right now because they're just fun, and what they're doing is just, it's good for the game. It's helping bring in all these new fans. I feel like, and this last year was sort of a revelation, and I mean, this offseason, I mean, it just shows how they're not messing around. I mean, they got Snell, Darvish, and Kim all within I think it was like a 24-hour span.
It was.
Is ridiculous, and I mean that's something you've never seen before, really. And honestly, I think that's just going to be a huge factor into how they play. But it just speaks to volumes, just to that aggressiveness. They have all these prospects they've gathered over the years, and it's like, okay, we can deal these guys for bigger pieces so we can win now. And that's what you do. That's how you build a franchise. And they've done that the best way possible, honestly. I really don't see a world where you don't consider them World Series contenders, honestly. I think that they're the obvious. I still don't know if they're the favorite for the division. I don't want to say that. I just think the Dodgers are just way far ahead of everybody in the league, but I think the second closest has got to be San Diego. So it's going to be pretty exciting and intriguing to see that battle this year because it's going to be pretty back and forth all year long. And if the Dodgers, I mean, even while I say that, the Dodgers still have a lot of guys out there that, I feel like the Dodgers still lost a little bit that helped make them so good last year. Not much, but obviously they lost a little bit. And I still think that those little things make it that much more interesting because the Padres have made, obviously, more moves than anyone. this offseason. So again, I see them as World Series contenders for sure. And I'm just excited to see how that division race goes, honestly.
I just don't know why. Why Dom's now happy with the Padres. It was so nice when he was just depressed because I actually had someone to sympathize with because my team sucks. But I've got Cole. Now. But overall, this has been a tremendous offseason for the Padres. They get former Cy Young winner Blake Snell. Then they add on Yu Darvish, who's coming off a resurging year. And I think that this is big for them. They have the best starting rotation in baseball. Granted, if somehow the Dodgers get Trevor Bauer, they overtake them. But as of now, they have the best rotation in baseball. And I think they have done it perfectly. They have gotten guys by using their top minor league system. There's two ways to use your minor league system. You can go the Royals route where you use them and let them go once they deserve big money. Or you can go the Padres route and use them to get top talent. And I love how the Padres have done that because they're close. They were close after last year. One of the funnest teams to watch last year through the way that they played. They have a tremendous lineup. They really do. And then all they need is some bullpen help. They've got Pomeranz. They've got Matt Strahm. They've got Pierce Johnson. But Emilio Pagan, Craig Stammen, Tim Hill were disappointing at best last year. So if they can beef up that bullpen, this is a team that could easily find their way in and make a run for the World Series. Really. They've got the lineup to do it. They've got the best left side of the infield in baseball. They've got a ton of talent in the outfield as well. I think that for them to be extremely successful, they've got to get some bullpen help. If they can add a couple guys in the bullpen, then they're set. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, the bullpen is the one spot that I think the Padres can still improve on. I don't think they have too many more moves, though, because at this point, the Padres' payroll is $160 million for the year, which is actually the fifth highest in baseball, which shout out to Peter Seidler. He's putting the checkbook on the table and saying, I want to win, and I couldn't be any happier. I mean, the rotation, of course, seemed like a strength last year going into the playoffs, and Clevenger got hurt, Lamet got hurt, Paddock didn't do well in the playoffs, and neither did Zach Davies. And part of the reason because of that is that the Padres rotation, those guys didn't strike guys out at a high rate last year. So what did Andrew Preller go out and do? He went out and got Yu Darvish, who strikes out guys at a really high rate. Blake Snell strikes out guys at a really high rate. Joe Musgrove, who last year struck out guys at a really high rate. He kind of found himself a little bit last year, and he had his best year of his career. He has 2 years left on his contract. He's going to be a big part of the Padres. He's also San Diego born and raised, so he gets to come home and play baseball in San Diego. So the rotation that couldn't strike people out and then, of course, didn't do anything about it in the playoffs is now almost a strength again. And I think that the Padres, we've seen in the playoffs, you have to be able to strike guys out. Now that you're facing the best hitters consistently and teams have those game plans locked in for you for that entire week that you're playing them, you have to be able to strike them out. You can't, rely on getting soft contact. That's just not how it works. We saw that against the Dodgers. It just didn't work. The Cardinals did a good job of putting the ball in play and getting base hits. So now the Padres are getting starting pitchers that can have postseason experience and go in and strike guys out. I think it's going to be phenomenal for the Padres. And it's going to be awesome because I can't wait. I truly believe the Padres are just as good as the Dodgers right now. I think the Dodgers have some more moves in them because Justin Turner's still a free agent. Pedro Baez is still a free agent. I mean, like you guys mentioned, Trevor Bauer is a free agent. So
He's not a free agent. He signed with the Astros.
Oh, right. So, yeah, I mean, technically they've gotten worse this offseason. Not that much worse, but technically they did. And I can't say the same thing about the Padres. So
here's the thing. Pedro Baez was not good in that bullpen. He was
wasn't-
okay. He was shaky.
He was fine.
Step up. He fell. And I think they're going to bring back Justin Turner. I think that's a foregone conclusion. I think their bullpen somehow got better by adding Tommy Kahnle and by getting
Kahnle and Tommy John. He's not pitching this year, and Baez had a 3.18 ERA last year. So I truly think this team it got slightly worse. They went from like being a 105 team win to like a 102 or 3 win team. So, but hey, that opens the door. It opens the door.
You'll take that. You take that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Every little bit matters.
They added Knable, which I think was actually a solid signing.
Yeah.
So I think that they're going to be fine. They're going to get Justin Turner back. This is the best team in baseball. Padres are right behind them. Don't worry. But this is the best team in baseball. They've got so much talent. They have a tremendous starting rotation, even though the Padres have the best. So it's going to be great to see these two teams clash. But I still got to give the overall to the Dodgers based on a stronger lineup and a stronger bullpen.
Yeah, I'm excited. Either way, I think the Padres are almost a lock to make the postseason, whether it's a wild card team or win the division. So, if the Padres don't make the playoffs, I'd assume it's going to be because of injuries, because the team is primed. So let's go.
Just imagine a Jacob deGrom and Blake Snell or Yu Darvish highlighting the wild card game.
I'd like to think about Walker Buehler starting that game. Thank you very much, Ryan.
And one thing to think about just real quick. Also, we mentioned everything about the starting rotation, and I don't know if getting Joe Musgrove changes this. I mean, Dom, you probably know better than I do, but they still have Mackenzie Gore, who could easily slot in as like a long reliever, or if they want to put him in the rotation. I mean, that's the best pitching prospect in baseball. So, I mean, they're so loaded. That's another guy that could easily bring up, and I mean, that just makes them that much better. So it's just crazy to think that, and they're going to have Clevenger, not this year, but the next year, joining that rotation. So they're just loaded. I mean, they're employing that Dodger strategy of acquire just as much pitching depth as possible. And like, in order to win, you can't have just 5 guys. You need to have like 6 or 7 who you can have as interchangeable at least, especially come playoff time when, like what the Dodgers did, they slotted some guys in their bullpen. And then maybe had them like, as an opener the next day or something like that. Like the Padres are sort of doing that, bringing in all this depth. And I think that's really going to help them. I mean, if not this year, definitely next year, because they're getting Clevenger back as well. And they'll probably bring up Mackenzie Gore, I would assume, within the next 2 years as well. So I just think that's something that doesn't get talked about enough, is just the depth. And that's what the Dodgers have been so good at, is bringing in this depth. And that's why they've been so good, is because if somebody's hurt or if somebody, gets pulled out of the game, they have another guy who can just come into the game and is just as good. So that's, I think, what the Padres are going for sure. And it's definitely, they're going to see it's going to work out for them. So
you also have to think about Dinelson Lamet is coming off a near Cy Young season. He was terrific. But the guy I want to see bounce back is Chris Paddock. You need to see more from him. Or when you have Clevenger come back, he's going to be moved to the bullpen, which I think was already a situation. But also, I want to see him bounce back because he was very much inconsistent at best last year. So I just want to see more from him. And if you can have a guy like Chris Paddock, mid-3 ERA, as your 4th or 5th guy, that's insane. Mm-hmm. So this rotation, that just shows how good the rotation is, and they have the potential to be even better than how we're talking about.
Yeah, the moral of the story with the Padres is depth, and that's what they've gone after, because they know that the 162-game season coming off the 60-game season is not going to be easy, and the Padres need to prove that they can be there for a 162-game season, because the success in 2020 was a 60-game season. So still need to prove it, and hopefully Mackenzie Gore does make it up to the major leagues this year. I mean, I think just about every single Padre fan thought he was going to last year, and then given the state of the starting pitching staff at the very end of the season, the fact that he didn't make it was a bit concerning. I still think he's going to be a god, but a little less sure of it for sure. So let's move out east because, of course, there's the other team that has had a very exciting offseason. And that, of course, is the New York Mets. They, of course, have made headlines recently for all the wrong reasons revolving around their newly fermented GM, who is now no longer their GM, Jared Porter. But the offseason, they have certainly improved the quality of their team, and I think they could certainly be a test to the Braves. First off, they went out and signed Trevor May to help boost that bullpen. I think that's a fantastic signing. He was coming off of one of his best years. So that was, of course, big for them. They signed James McCann to be their catcher. Wilson Ramos just wasn't what they expected him to be. But I guess that's what you got, and you sign an old catcher who can't really defend anymore. He's just going to be a failure, and that's exactly what he basically was. And then they, of course, went out and traded for Francisco Lindor and Carlos Carrasco. I thought that was certainly interesting because the Indians have traded away their three best starting pitchers over the past couple of years. Now, of course, they have Shane Bieber, Zach Plesac, and other guys coming up that are going to fill their spots. But, I mean, you look at the rotation from 2018, and they've traded away the three best pitchers within a year. So it's certainly been interesting to see that. But the Mets certainly have, I think they've improved their team more than any other team in baseball. Do you guys think they're as good as the Braves, or do you guys think that the Mets are just a wild card team and they're still a playoff team?
For me, it's I mean, I've bought into the Mets for the past couple of years now, and I mean, every single time, I mean, on paper, even without the guys they brought in this offseason so far, I mean, they're stacked. They have a really good roster on paper. The problem is they can't stay healthy. And so I think that's still what, for me at least, they need to prove is if they can stay healthy, then yes, I think they're definitely going to at least give the Braves a run for their money. I mean, if they're not going to do that already, then I mean, it's nothing short of disappointing. They need to stay healthy. That's the huge thing. They'd like guys like Syndergaard need to be healthy. Stroman needs to be healthy. Those guys are really good when they're in the rotation, but obviously they can't do anything when they're out of it. Pete Alonso needs to find his groove that he was in during his rookie year. Adding Lindor to the lineup definitely takes a little bit of that pressure off for sure. But, I mean, not all of it. That guy needs to perform. That guy needs to do what he gets paid to do, and that's hit bombs. I think James McCann is really going to help. That's a really good all-around catcher that they got for much cheaper than they could have gotten JT Realmuto for. So I think that's a really good sign for them. I still think they probably need to add another starter. That's why they're still in on Trevor Bauer. I think once they shore up that and once they shore up the bullpen, they're in really good shape. But, yeah, I mean, definitely, again, on paper, they look like a team that's going to really, turn some heads this year. And that's huge for the Mets because that's something they seemingly just haven't done in a long time. They have all this huge expectation coming into every year, but then they just falter. They get hurt. They don't perform. And that's sort of what needs to change. That needs to sort of just, completely shift from the way it's been before, because if that doesn't happen, then again, yeah, I mean, they're going to look like bottom feeders, and that's not what you want as a Mets fan, I would assume, obviously. And again, I think if it's mainly the bullpen at this point, because again, like you said, adding Carrasco into that Lindor trade was such a huge part. That trade's a steal, honestly. I mean, that's a whole nother tangent we could go on, but that trade for the pieces that the Indians got back just honestly shouldn't have happened. But I think really what's huge about the Mets is that, they added that extra starting pitcher into that trade. But if they shore up the bullpen and they can stay healthy, then yes, this will be – I honestly think they're a World Series contender at that point if they can stay healthy. So as long as that's the case, I think, yeah, for sure, they're definitely going to test the Braves.
Yeah, I think they will. And I think it's based on pitching, mainly because they've got Syndergaard coming back, Stroman. They've still got DeGrom. They just got Carrasco. And I think David Peterson is going to be very good. He pitched just under 50 innings last year, went 6-2 with a 3.44 ERA. That's all they really need from him to be their fifth guy. That's really all they need. And he was good. So I think he's going to take a step forward, which I think is big for them. Getting Lindor is huge, especially after the whole Robinson Cano mess, because he's a cheater. It helps. And especially if you can get a guy like Francisco Lindor, you do it. That trade is kind of a robbery, in my opinion. They got Carrasco and Lindor, and I thought they have to give up a left arm for it, and they didn't. So I thought that was a great trade for them. I think they have so much talent. I love how Michael Conforto has just bursted onto the scene. I think he's going to be so big for that lineup. Since being drafted in 2014, he has 118 career home runs already. He is killing the ball. He is a big piece of that lineup. And like you said, Cole, they need to get Pete Alonso going. He hit sub 240 at 231 last year. He hit 16 home runs, but the last thing you want from Pete Alonso is for him to become power dependent. And that's the last thing you want. You don't want him to be strikeout or home run. That's the last thing you want. And like you both said, James McCann's big. He's a very big signing because upgrade at bat from Wilson Ramos, who was a disappointment last year, and a guy who's very solid in the field as well. So I think the Mets are on a very, very good course right now. They're just like every other team that we've really mentioned. I think they still need another guy or two, but that lineup is set.
Yeah, I'm a bit concerned about the pitching staff, just a little bit, because you guys talk about Syndergaard. He had Tommy John surgery last March, so he's going to miss the first half of the season. And even when he comes back, who knows how he's going to look. I think he could serve as more of a bullpen role because I think that's more of what fits, a guy who's coming off Tommy John surgery, joining a contender. I think that's just a little bit more realistic. And Stroman didn't pitch at all last year. He was obviously really good in the years before, but then Stroman was a bit banged up, and then he waited until he accumulated enough service time from last year to opt out of the season, so he got paid and could become a free agent. And of course, he signed the qualifying offer because he wanted to play for the Mets, but he just didn't want to risk himself getting injured in the pandemic season, and he wanted to make sure that he was able to get paid. So I credit him for doing that. That was genius by him. So there are some question marks about that rotation. It's not as well out as some people make it seem out to be. That's why I think the Carlos Carrasco addition was just huge because he's been an extremely dependent pitcher for the Indians. He obviously had the cancer that he had to overcome, but before that, he was really good. He came back in the latter half of 2019 and in 2020 and was spectacular. He was really good last year, and he didn't get any credit for it at all. So I tip my cap to that guy. He heard but I want to pump the brakes on the rotation a little bit because I don't think it's just as good as people are talking about. But the lineup, like you guys mentioned, it's fantastic. The addition of Lindor to go along with Conforto, Nimmo, I'm as high on Nimmo as anyone is. Pete Alonso, he has insane power. I don't think he's ever going to hit above 250 again. That's just I just don't see him doing that. But if he's going to hit 240 with 45 home runs, who cares? That's a really good hitter, and that's all the Mets can really ask out of him. And then Jeff McNeil, the flying squirrel, he's an incredible hitter. I really like him, along with James McCann. I think it's one of the best lineups in baseball that's not getting enough talked about. I think their lineup's underrated, but I think their pitching staff's a wee bit overrated. So they're an interesting team. They're going to be really fun to watch. The Steve Cohen era has officially started, and I think that's a really fun team to watch. And another team in the NL East has surprised people. It's really flying under the radar, and I think it's the Nationals. They were injured last year. Strasburg didn't pitch a ton. Scherzer wasn't as good because he was hurt, and I think he's going to bounce back extremely well. And then they added John Lester this offseason. They signed him as a free agent. And then they traded for Josh Bell, first baseman for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Really good 2019 season. Didn't really have a great 2020 season, but if I had to play mid-pandemic for the Pittsburgh Pirates last year, I wouldn't have been that good. And then they also brought back Ryan Zimmerman. I believe it was yesterday they re-signed him. So, yeah, it was yesterday because Bob Nightingale was talking about the death of Hank Aaron, and he was talking about how it's weird, and then everyone's like, you're the one making it weird, Bob. But Bob's naturally weird. So do you guys think the Nationals can compete with those two teams at the top, or are they just going to be like that sixth best team in the NL?
So I still think they're definitely far behind from the top the top of the East. But I will say that, and I mean, one move you didn't mention was the Schwarber move, and that's
Right.
a huge get for them as well. Definitely not. I mean, like that would be even better. Like if we had certainty that there was going to be the DH this year, but it doesn't matter. That guy's been in the National League forever, and so I think just adding his bat is huge for them. But yeah, I mean, Josh Bell. When that trade went down, I was very surprised, pleasantly surprised for the Nationals because I think he's going to have a bounce back year. I think a lot of guys who had bad years this past year are obviously going to have bounce back years. And he's one of those guys who I would expect big things out of him. John Lester, another low risk deal for a guy who is coming off of a pretty bad year, no lie, but definitely again a low risk deal, a guy who can eat up innings at the back end of your rotation for sure. While you let those top of the rotation guys who are coming off of injury, do what they do. I think they're a team that can definitely surprise people. I don't really think they're a team that is like, gonna for sure be like, a second, like a wild card team. I think they're sort of on the bubble. They're like one of those fringe teams. If they add a little bit more depth, I think, to their lineup, I think they're in a good spot. But yeah, no, I definitely think the Nationals have kind of flown under the radar this offseason. And again, there's still some bigger names out there. I've heard that they're in the market for a catcher, so JT Realmuto could be a guy who goes there and fits well. So, I mean, watch out for them. I think they can really surprise people, especially if they get on a roll come mid-season like they did when they won the World Series. If they can get on a roll like that, I think they're a team you kind of have to watch out for.
Yeah, there's nothing against their rotation. They've got one of the best rotations. They've got a ton of talent there. They've got a talented outfit with Victor Robles, Schwarber, and Juan Soto. They've just got Josh Bell. And Trey Turner last year was fantastic. He really took it upon himself to make up for that loss of Anthony Rendon, which was huge for them. Really was. So I really love that aspect. I think they need to add one more big bat. And I don't know if it's finally making that trade for Chris Bryant or going another route, but I think they need to add another bat on the infield. And, yeah, I think they need to get a catcher. So if they can address those two areas, then they could be a team that could make a lot of noise but be very quiet about doing so. They could be a sneaky team. So they just have to make a couple moves, and then they could be in that conversation to be a wild card team.
I think they're the sixth best team in the National League, and I think teams like the Diamondbacks and the Giants are shortly behind them. Going along, I mean, counting whoever wins the Central is the third best team, I should add. So I think that they're certainly an interesting team because I think that those guys will bounce back. Scherzer, Strasburg, Corbin, I mean, those are the big three in the rotation. I think they're going to be incredible for them next year. And a lot of people don't realize how good Trey Turner was this past season. He was just as good as Fernando Tatis Jr., Trevor Story, and Corey Seager, who got all the credit in the world for being those really good shortstops last year in the NL. So I think that he's a big player for them. And then, of course, the best hitter in baseball, in my opinion. So, I mean, not the best player because obviously you have Mike Trout who can just do everything in the 95th plus percentile. But you got Juan Soto, and he's absolutely incredible. And I picked him to win the MVP. I think if he didn't miss the first 10 games of the season, I think he wins it because of a false positive COVID-19 test. So it happens when you have to make sure these guys are safe to play. I get it. It's just funny that he had to sit out for that long because of the DC quarantine policy. And I think I would have gotten that right, but I didn't. Oh, well, tough luck. But I think this team's poised for a bounce back. They finished the year strong, and I think they're going to be right around 500, possibly a little bit better. And Cole, like you mentioned, I forgot to mention Schwarber. I'm a big Schwarber guy. He's got the same power. He doesn't hit lefties as well, obviously. And he's not as bad of a liability as people make him out to be in the field. I think people just say, like, Schwarber's playing left. Why is he in left? They look at it. He's slightly below average. And considering what his bat can be, you'll take slightly below average out in left field. So interesting signing. I think they're a fun team to watch. And we got 5 minutes left on this broadcast, and we're going to stick with something in the NL East. And it has nothing to do with what the season could look like, but yesterday it was announced that Hank Aaron had passed, arguably one of the greatest hitters of all time. He was the home run king until Barry Bonds took him down, and a lot of people, don't think that's legit, myself included. I think Bonds should be in the Hall of Fame, but he certainly passed Hank Aaron's home run record because of steroids. I mean, Hank Aaron, one of the greatest players of all time. I don't think you can really say enough about him. He had to persevere through racism just to get to MLB. I believe he is the last player to migrate from the Negro League into Major League Baseball, and that's just an incredible thing to do. 305 career hitter. That's, of course, the Hall of Fame mark. Quote, quote, 755 home runs, career 155 OPS plus, MVP, 25-time All-Star. He also won 3 Gold Gloves and 2 batting titles to go along with one of the players who had the most home runs of all time. What do you guys think this means for baseball, and what do you guys have to say about the passing of Hank?
I mean, obviously, just a huge loss. I mean, baseball has lost a lot of great legends this past year. I mean, Tom Seaver, Bob Gibson, amongst others, so many others. But Hank Aaron's Hank Aaron will always live in infamy, if you will. I mean, he's just one of, if not the greatest hitter ever. Just looking at his baseball reference here, I mean, it's hard to argue any of that at all. I mean, he was just phenomenal. Great player. Was a huge part of what made baseball the mid 20th century. What made baseball so great. It was a part of so many great moments. Really good player. Obviously, you can't say that enough. But I mean, it's just obviously none of us got to watch him play. But anyone who's played baseball, anyone who's been a fan of baseball, you just kind of know the name. Like, there's this aura that surrounds it, and anytime a name like that is lost, you can't help but sort of pay your respect, because in a way it's demanded, because obviously of everything he did for baseball and everything he represented. So definitely a huge loss, and I pray for his family and everyone who was close to him, and obviously he will never be forgotten, and that's the most important thing, because of, again, what he did and what he represented, and just the player he was. And so I think that's all I really have to say about it. But yeah.
This is a man who was, I believe, is one of the greatest hitters of all time, has a case to be the greatest hitter of all time. Ranks 3rd in hits, 2nd in home runs, 4th in runs, 1st in RBIs and extra base hits, and then 1st in total bases. My dad called me yesterday, and he and I were talking, and he just talked about how he remembers the game where he broke Babe Ruth's record in home runs, hit number 715. And it's just amazing to hear about that, but so sad to see one of the great legends of the game and one of the guys who is just a huge spokesperson for the league and just a symbol of perseverance go is so saddening. Like Cole said, I pray for his family, but the game of baseball lost a true legend, and it's going to sting for a while. You're on mute, Dom.
I realized that. It was really telling whenever he'd come on like a national broadcast or a Braves broadcast, and the clips would be brought upon. He was just so intelligent, and everyone wanted to listen to him because he was such a legend. I mean, all 3 of us never got to watch him play because we were too young. But I mean, we've all seen the highlights. We, of course, have all seen the 715, like you mentioned, and just figured we'd go out on that note talking about Hank Aaron, one of the greatest hitters of all time, passed away, lived a fantastic life, and we wish nothing but the best for his family and his friends. So that's going to wrap up this episode of the Golden Sombrero Show. We will be coming to you all weekly. We're now returning to Blaze Radio. We're going to have a more regimented schedule. On behalf of Cole Bradley and Ryan Blank, we hope that there will be some more baseball news to talk about next week. We thank you all for tuning in, and we'll catch you guys next week.